Welcome to Journey. My guest this evening is Peter Davenport, Director of the National UFO Reporting Center hotline, stationed here in Seattle, Washington. And in between his other guest appearances on Hard Copy and Strange Universe and CBS with Dan Rather, we're lucky to have Peter back on Journey because he is going to update us on what's been going on in the night skies and the day skies all around the country. So Peter, what's been going on, and basically what has the other media and TV stations been reporting also?
Yeah, I'm delighted to be back to Journey. Journey has been very, very generous with the National UFO Reporting Center, and I always enjoy coming back here. But there has been a lot of reports that have come into us lately, and we're getting very good coverage in other parts of the media now, television, radio, and so on. People are beginning to awaken to this phenomenon. They're beginning to realize that it's not just confabulation, it's not just swamp gas and so on and so forth. We've had some dramatic sightings recently, and I'm delighted to be able to talk about some of these for the benefit of our audience today.
Well, it's fortunate that you collect the calls nationally and sometimes even internationally, because as that kind of clearinghouse for the data, then you capture where they're tracking more or less. And so some of these TV stations are going to report incidents that were local to them, but you can give us the bigger picture because it really wasn't a local incident, it was a huge incident across the whole state.
Yeah. That's the advantage of having a national hotline, as you properly suggest, I think, is we get an overview and we see what happens in one state and then an adjacent state and so on. And you get a completely different picture and you get the overview. It's very important. But the one recent incident that was reported to us was a mass sighting, I think is the proper term for it. It was down in Arizona on the 13th of March. It was a Thursday night. And I think it's probably the most dramatic sighting that we have taken calls on since I became director about 2.5 years ago. It was quite a night, and there's still ramifications from those sightings. It's now been several months now.
Well, we'll show a TV clip, we'll play some of your audio clips, and in the very best way that journalists have attempted to look at the evidence, look at the multiple sightings, listen to the eyewitnesses, it's still inconclusive, isn't it?
Yeah. There is some conflicting data which we don't understand. We took hundreds and hundreds of calls about this cluster of incidents down in Arizona, and it's still not clear in my mind exactly what went on. We even think that there was a little disinformation that might have been incorporated into the data stream.
We have X-Files going on, don't we?
Yeah, could be, could be. But we were given some very good information from people who alleged to have been personal witness to an intercept of this object over downtown Phoenix by 2 F-15 U.S. Air Force fighters, and we can't confirm it. So we'll talk about that later. But the press coverage was better than we've had in the past, although interestingly, it's still difficult, we find, to get people in the press to pay serious attention to these incidents. I'll talk about that later on. But,
well, where did it start?
Yeah, the first call we took was from northern Arizona, Paulden, Arizona, although it took us days to find this out. The object had actually been seen over Henderson, Nevada, which is up here. I put a round circle here because we don't know the direction it was seen flying up here in Nevada. But the first call was from Paulden, Arizona. A very serious and intelligent sounding fellow called us up and described how he was driving to the north on this highway with his family members, and they saw a cluster of lights in the sky. It was very interesting that he identified the color. He said they were all red, and we'll come back to that point in a moment. That's part of the confusion on this, is there were differing reports of different colors, the shapes of the lights, and so on. We took about a 3 or 4 minute report from the gentleman in Paulden. Within minutes, the phone started ringing off the hook. The next report was from Prescott and Prescott Valley in very rapid sequence. Shortly thereafter, a gentleman who did not want to identify himself called from Chino Valley, just north of Prescott. People reporting essentially the same things with minor differences. What they saw was apparently a huge cluster of lights in a wedge-shaped pattern overhead, moving slowly, except in those places that I indicate with the black dots. In those locations, the object was seen to be hovering directly above the heads of the witnesses on the ground. In fact, in Prescott Valley, a young woman saw this object, and it was close enough to her that she decided to get a better look at it, and she started walking towards it, and she walked directly under this object, and it was huge. Well, that was the beginning of the report, and we'll play some audio clips from some of these people so our audience members can get a better feeling
what they said.
of what was reported. And why don't we play an audio clip from Paulden, Arizona. This was, again, the first report that we took, and listen firsthand to what this gentleman had to describe to us.
Okay.
I was just leaving the house, and I was traveling northbound, and I looked to my left, which is to the northeast actually, and I caught some lights that were traveling, and they were arranged in a strange fashion. There were 3 or 4 in a V, and one flying off to the backside, so to speak, and they were cruising southbound, not cruising.
Yeah. So that was the first report we took, and please note that he didn't say it in this cut, but he was on this highway. He was looking off to the northwest, and the object was coming from the north-northwest. The next cut I'd like to play comes, I believe, from Prescott Valley. Quite a number of people in Prescott Valley and Prescott, they're side by each, very close, saw this object. And let's play the second cut now and listen to what a young woman had to say.
We saw them in the northeast sky, and they appeared to be hovering.
Oh, really?
And the lights seemed to be in a line. And as we walked closer to them and were more directly underneath them, we noticed that they were in a formation that might have been an outline of a triangle.
So they were close enough such that you could walk and get under them, huh?
We did, and we could see them cross what appeared to be beneath the stars, because we could see other stars through this.
Yes. And were stars obliterated as this object passed? Okay.
No, they were not.
So that was the second call we took, and she tells us several things. First of all, the first sighting, just minutes earlier, described a wedge-shaped pattern of lights, and I'm going to show some written reports and drawings here of what people reported to us. This next call came from just south of there. This young woman was describing that it looked like a straight line of lights. We'll see some video cuts here in a moment of the same object apparently seen down over Phoenix. The third cut I would like to play actually comes from Phoenix. The object slashed down along the mountains. It appears to have turned to the southwest. It then turned back to the southeast. I think it went over Luke Air Force Base, and the significance of that will be evident to our audience here in a moment. The next audio cut, the third and last one I'd like to play, comes from very close to Saddleback Mountain, which is up in the northeastern corner, or Camelback Mountain, northeastern corner of Phoenix. Let's listen to what they had to describe they saw in Phoenix just moments after these first two calls.
Okay.
About 10 minutes ago, I saw in the northeastern sky over Phoenix a formation of lights that gave the brilliance and size of stars. However, it was in a formation of a triangle. There were 5 lights. At the top point of the triangle, there were 3 lights, one at the tip and then one on either side. There were 2 other lights on the bottom points of what would be a triangle shape.
I can't. So that was about the third call that we took. Let me now show one of the illustrations that we received from one of the witnesses. This comes from Phoenix. This is the first written report we received, and this gives our viewers some idea of the relative position of the lights.
Right.
Now, what is still not clear, believe it or not, is whether people were looking at 5, 7, or 9 lights, individual objects in very precise formation, or whether they were looking at one object that had these lights affixed to it. The reports are conflicting. It's led some of the investigators down in the Phoenix area to conclude that there were several events taking place. But that is the first written report we took, and this object hovered over people in Phoenix for 5 minutes.
Now that's
a mother
time to see that, yes.
with 4 children were standing just south of Camelback Mountain looking directly up at this object. They estimated that the object was twice the wingspan of a 747 airliner, hovering motionless. This is another interesting report that we received. This comes from a young woman who was driving with her husband and 2 children and mother-in-law up the highway from Tucson. They were just about here on the highway, midway between Tucson and Phoenix, and that is what they saw directly above them. And to give our viewers some idea of the reported size to us, they claim that they were driving directly underneath this object for 2 minutes at 80 miles an hour, and it was still above them.
That is huge. And we are discussing mountain ranges in between some of these cities.
Yes.
That would obscure, view for miles and miles, obviously, because one of the ideas is it's flares that were dropped off and remain at a steady altitude and then go off simultaneously.
I'm glad you mentioned the flare theory, because within a few hours, the next morning, the military at Luke Air Force Base apparently were claiming, 1, that they'd taken no calls about this incident, number 2, that, well, even though there was no incident, it was military flares. Well, I'd go back to our map for just a moment and point out that the object went from Henderson, Nevada to Paulden, Arizona in a matter of not more than 21 minutes. And it went from Paulden to Prescott in certainly less than 2 minutes, and it may have been just a matter of seconds. So those are pretty sophisticated military flares, if indeed they were flares. Traveling at high speeds.
At high speed.
Supersonic flares, moreover.
Yes, exactly.
There's been some very good analysis done by UFO investigators in the Phoenix area and elsewhere. Tom Taylor, Bill Motzer, and a few of the others. Bill Hamilton has worked on it, people with whom I've been in touch. They did some very nice analysis. They got some video footage that we'll see here in a moment, but it looks as though the object was probably on the order of 9,000 feet above people's heads. One of the things that's very interesting about this case is that this object, or these objects, whichever it is, passed through the airspace of not fewer than 3 international airports, flying or moving perpendicular to the prevailing air traffic, and maybe as many as 6 airports had this thing fly directly over it. We have a report, unconfirmed, that a very senior retired member of the U.S. military was landing his aircraft at Prescott, and he reported this to the airport and gave a very detailed description. And it's further reported to us that Luke Air Force Base scrambled some fighters in response to the senior military report from the air of what he was looking at. It's an interesting aspect of the case. We're unable to confirm that at this point.
Well, and as you pointed out, it could be multiple events going on, and perhaps if there were some target flares at one location, it does not account for all the other locations of events going on in sightings.
Yeah, I'd like to return to the map for just a second, and I'll close off for our audience what happened. The object turned to the southwest. It went over a town called Wickenburg, Arizona. It went down over Phoenix. It turned directly south in Phoenix, went down to Maricopa, and then it went down over the highway. The last report we had, last credible report, is from Tucson, where the object split up into different lights and lined up in a straight line and apparently went to the southwest. So that in a nutshell is what happened.
Very sophisticated maneuvering, almost following a highway pattern, almost wanting to be seen, flying very low.
Yes.
What's going on, Peter?
This is a very important case. I am delighted to have an opportunity to go through this in detail for our audience, because this is a case that's not going to go away. It involves the military. It involves at least hundreds and maybe as many as tens of thousands of witnesses. We had, I'm told, at least 12 people managed to get this object on videotape, and many, many other aspects of this case that lend distinct credibility, plus the fact that its presence was reported to us in rapid sequence over a broad area.
5 TV stations in Arizona reported strange lights and tried to come up with explanations, and in most cases they really could not come to any valid or strong conclusions.
I would like to show some of the video clips from these TV stations now that were sent to us by people.
I phoned ABC Channel 15 in Phoenix. Bill Spencer gives what is a very good rendition, called the FAA, called Luke Air Force Base, called Sky Harbor. And we'll see what other TV stations the media is saying, because they are attempting to report it to the best of their ability.
Yeah. Let's look at one of these TV cuts, and then we'll look at another one, and then I'd like to talk about the press, the newspapers in Arizona, and we'll discuss for a moment what they talked about or what they didn't talk about.
Right.
Did you?
Well, we haven't answered what they are, but we do know that something strange did happen in the sky over Arizona last night. More than 100 witnesses called the UFO hotline, and at least 2 local people caught the strange lights on videotape. This is the way the lights looked over Phoenix at about 10 o'clock last night. The home video shows 3 strange objects hovering directly over downtown.
I'm assured by looking at this that these objects are in front of South Mountain. But I have no take on what they are at this time. We haven't had enough time to study the situation.
And these objects were not only seen over Phoenix.
There have been multiple descriptions, but the people up in northern Arizona saw lights that were distinctly red. By the time they'd gotten down to Phoenix, they were white, the color of stars, bluish white, people described.
The first sighting last night came in from Paulden, then Prescott, and then Phoenix, where the objects turned white. The white objects were later seen over Tucson, and the last sightings were from northwest Arizona around Kingman. Some witnesses described the fleet of lights as a V-shaped formation. Some say they were in a line. Others saw a diamond shape, and still others saw a star.
Another observer reported that when one turned, they all turned together, as if by the same command.
And the number of lights seen ranges from 1 to 9. I'm told that at least 1 traffic controller saw the lights. They were reported by at least 1 commercial airline pilot, but John and Marlene, nothing showed up on radar.
Nothing showed up on radar?
Nothing.
All right, a mystery then still. Jim, thank you.
You're welcome.
Now see, nothing showed up on radar, and yet if it had been military dropping flares, the military planes would have shown up on
Presumably.
radar. Yeah.
I think that's a reasonable assessment. Plus, let it be said that the object that we're talking about here passed directly over an airliner, and I think perhaps in the next TV video cut we have, they'll talk about this, but the object passed directly over Sky Harbor Airport in Phoenix, and the airplane taking off reported it to the tower. So if it was military, they were flying in a dramatically irresponsible fashion. I've done a little bit of flying myself. You don't fly in what's known as a TCA, a terminal control area. You don't fly over airliners that are taking off from a major international airport. And that's where the object was. Again, it flew over at least 3 and maybe as many as 6 airports.
What about the speculation that it possibly could be our own military high technology aircraft that we have not been told about? Still, that's irresponsible, as you would say, and would lead people to see it and report it. And if they don't want us to know about it, why do it?
Yeah, interesting theory, and it's bandied about quite a bit. But I can't imagine that the military would be flying this experimental object over airports, over populated areas. Doesn't make any sense at all.
Because they're still in denial as to the fact that there's anything flying around out there extraordinary.
And let it be said, too, that we know that it was flying at supersonic speeds to cover the distances in the elapsed time, and it created no sonic boom. So if it's military, I am impressed with our engineers, because they're fabricating some very interesting equipment. I don't think it was. Plus, the final report from Tucson pointed out that the lights split up into different swirling lights and arranged themselves in a straight line and then went to the southwest. I don't think we're talking about a piece of American military equipment.
No.
But let's go to the next video cut and show what another
This time they
station.
got your name right.
Yeah.
At least we're careful
at least
to get
they
your
got
name.
Davenport
Peter,
right. I don't complain about the first name. Let's look at the next cut down in, I think, Phoenix.
It's live overlooking the skies of Phoenix, and Bill, a lot of our viewers who called last night are wondering what those objects were. Any answers yet?
We don't have any answers, Paul and Robin, but I'll tell you this. It's like clockwork. Every day in the valley, someone will call the police reporting seeing a UFO. Strange lights in the sky moving in strange ways. But it is very rare for thousands of people to call and report seeing the same lights in the same spot at the same time. It happened last night, and eyewitnesses who saw it say it's like nothing they've ever seen before.
I was like, holy crap, look! And it was a perfect triangle just floating across the sky, way up there. Aliens first thing that I thought, but it scared the heck out of me.
It isn't exactly close encounters of the third kind, but This series of strange lights, which appeared in the northern Arizona sky last night, has thousands of people scratching their heads.
I think it was a spaceship of some sort, because, I mean, I've never seen anything like that before.
Last night, shortly after 8 p.m., hundreds, maybe thousands of Arizonans reported seeing a triangular-shaped object with 3 distinct lights streaking across the sky at incredible speed.
Just right up there, and then it flew like right across over and down that way.
According to reports, the sightings began at about 8:20 just north of Prescott, with the lights then moving rapidly from Prescott to Glendale to Tempe to Chino Valley, and finally arriving in Tucson at about 9 o'clock. The lights traveled close to 200 miles in about 40 minutes. Even a commercial airline pilot here at Sky Harbor Airport reported seeing the lights last night. He radioed the tower just after takeoff, telling them that the object was directly above him. That means that air traffic controllers in the tower should have picked the object up on their radar screens. And yet they say they saw nothing. Over the past 10 years, there have been literally hundreds of sightings all over the country, especially here in the Southwest. But this sighting is different. The UFO group MUFON, Mutual UFO Network, calls this the most dramatic sighting in Arizona this decade. Now, we have checked into it. We called the FAA, Sky Harbor Airport, and Luke Air Force Base for some kind of an explanation as to these strange lights, and so far, we have nothing. Paul and Robin.
Bill, you said over the last 10 years there's been a lot of significant sightings across the country. When was the last one here in the Southwest?
Well, according to MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network, about 2 weeks ago, they say there was a series of 4 golden discs or flying saucers that were hovering just above Phoenix. That's the first I've heard of it.
All right, well, we'll be keeping...
Well, you know, you work with MUFON and speak at MUFON conferences. You speak all over the country. You speak out of the country. In Australia, you're really getting around.
I've been very lucky. People are beginning to wake up to our existence here.
But you are the National UFO Reporting Center.
That's correct.
And you have a website, which we will show at the end. I just want to clarify that because there's several groups out there for people to phone up and you know, participate in this investigation.
We're grateful to these TV stations for their coverage. The newspapers were very slow to cover, except the Prescott newspaper. They did a very nice job of publishing an article the next day. Phoenix newspaper, very slow, very slow. Mesa newspaper reported that they didn't have a reporter who could cover it. They were all filled up with other tasks. But this was a dramatic sighting, and it will take us years to get all of the data pertaining to this sighting because it was a dramatic one, most dramatic I've covered, and apparently I agree on that point with MUFON. It was quite something.
Well, now, the Southwest does have a lot of sightings, and people would be, speculate that because of Area 51 being in that area, that could account for some of it. However, I want to point out, you, as a center that captures sightings all across the country, you'll be the first to say, hey, the East Coast has a lot of sightings, down Florida, up, you know, Washington, Oregon. It's not any one area, is it?
No, it isn't. I do think that the same object that we've just seen on the video has been reported to us from other parts of the country. As we now go back through the data, we think that we see the same object being reported from a number of other states as much as 6 months before this incident. So it may have been here for a while. We don't understand the significance of that at all. We are as confused by some aspects of these data as no doubt the people who are not familiar with ufology.
Well, the eyewitness accounts, though, point to supersonic speeds, very, very large craft or multiple crafts, and no sound, no noise.
None whatsoever.
And also not showing up on radar.
That's right.
If we're to believe that the radar people are saying, no, we didn't see anything.
Didn't show up on radar. And if it was military flares, are we to believe that the military flies or drops their flares over Sky Harbor Airport while commercial aircraft are taking off? Doesn't make an ounce of sense to us. There were a lot of aspects, and plus at one point, just south of Camelback Mountain, the object was seen, reportedly, to shoot out a brief bolt of red light out of the nose of it. That's very interesting. There's a lot at work here.
There is, and I really want to thank you for sharing all of this data that you depend on. The phone calls coming in, followed up written reports, very important.
That's
I know
correct.
drawings, if you can get them, video is great,
Yep.
photos, anything.
Yep.
You'll take it, put it out there on the website. I know you need help to get it out there eventually, and that's part of the thing. You know, you're a volunteer group, which I do want people to know. I really appreciate you sharing that with us and updating us of what's going on all
My
over
pleasure.
the country.
My pleasure. Thanks very much for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us on Journey, and keep your eyes peeled, because day or night things are flying around and we want you to report them to Peter.